Hello, I'm Judy Herman. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to share with you one thing about for your mental and emotional well-being and relationship well-being, why high achieving women need to test their thoughts. I am the author of Beyond Messy Relationships, and I've written a book, and the subtitle is Divine Invitations to Your Authentic Self. But I want to share with you three things. I think three things. I usually show up with three things each time, but why it's so very important to test your automatic thoughts, especially if you are a high achieving woman and you are married or in relationship with a very resistant spouse or significant other. Because there's something about that when we grow, it's going to change the relationship dance and how it used to flow. It may not flow like it did before based upon your own growth and development. Now, I've been a counselor for several years. This is not a substitute for professional counseling services, of course, but these stories that I hear a lot are of women who are high achievers who hold themselves back because they're walking around on eggshells and they don't want to make their spouses feel less than because of their own growth. And so they avoid or they get to a place of complacency or they don't speak up. Well, here's what's so very important about challenging your own thoughts and your automatic thoughts. We as women, so many times we give our power away. I remember years ago facing a counselor in couples session, and this counselor said, "Judy, you're a powerful woman." And I thought, oh, whoa, I'm not supposed to be powerful. And we shrink back on that because of our cultural upbringing, right? So here's what I've learned since that time, and some ancient words of wisdom here, that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but he's given us a spirit of love, power, and of a sound mind. And that is so very crucial for us as women. So many times, and here's another situation in which, yes, women, hey Clarice, glad you're joining here. This is awesome. But sometimes women will say, I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest. And yet they'll show up and be angry and spew out accusations and say that I feel that, and then a lot of negative things come out, which sets the stage for the conflict in the relationship, right? And there, she says, well, I'm just being real. No, you're not just being real. Basically what you're being is you're acting like a reptile because that reptilian part of your brain is spewing out, and that is not really tuning into your full humanity. So what we need to do instead, of course, take some deep breaths. But test the stories, test the negative stories, test the narrative that's going on in your mind. What is it that you believe? Now, I'm going to share with you one thing about the brain. We have what you call the reticular activation system in our brains. And the way it works, it helps. It shows us what our focus and what our view is. For example, if you go out and you make a decision and you buy a vehicle, and then you buy that vehicle, you get in it and you drive around, and then you notice all the same make, model, color of those same vehicles. That's your reticular activating system. Hey, Danielle. And so we need to keep in mind decisions that we make will activate this reticular activating system, and then we look for those things. Right? Now, the way that this works and creates more messes in your relationship is that, if your spouse did something and you're making a decision about, showing up like a reptile, I'm going to show him, or whatever the case is, it can go into a negative zone. And then you're going to be as if we were buying a new car and see all these cars, same make and model, but we're going into a negative zone. We're going to find the pieces of that story that fit. And then we actually are finding it, whatever you focus on. Where your focus goes, energy flows. And then you bring that energy into the relationship. So I'm saying that we can change that. We can change that, first of all, by recognizing what our stories are, recognizing those automatic thoughts, recognizing those beliefs, not taking them as gospel truth, but then making a decision that is different. Like, you can own your power, okay? And you can own gentleness within that power and speak so much more powerfully. You can take your deep breaths and you can be aware. And I talk more about that, but I think it's so very important. We, as women, and if you identify yourself as a woman who's grown, has accomplished some things and is different than you were 10 years ago, and you see things a whole lot different, and you've developed yourself professionally and personally, it's going to change that marital dance. And that's why, as human beings, we're all and entities, marriages and partnerships were designed to grow and grow up. But don't hold yourself back. That's the main message that I want to give you. Your life is so very valuable and so very powerful, and there's only one like you. So don't shrink, okay? Don't shrink if it is no longer working in the relationship. But the main thing is that you don't hold yourself back, and also that you don't attack. But you show up in a very appropriate, calm, own your own stuff, right? And be authentic. But authentic does not mean being accusatory and letting your anger go unleashed and spew out. No, your anger is yours. And here's the thing, I want to challenge you. If somebody accuses you of being overly sensitive, or you're too emotional, don't buy that. It's simply not true. You're a human being who has emotions, and your emotions are valuable. And let's let them flow. Let's listen to the messages of those emotions. Don't hold back, because they're valuable and they have messages that are very valuable to you. And listening to them, they're going to flow, okay? So yeah, that's the main thing. And if you've not gotten a copy of my book, Beyond Messy Relationships, it's available wherever books are sold. But I'd really like you to go to my website, and you can get the author-signed copy and order it from there, or you can download the first 3 chapters for free. And you can also take the relationship stress quiz, kind of see where you are in your relationship. But it will change the dance, your own growth. Hopefully your spouse or significant other will show up, but that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to continue growing and to be who you really are, and own your emotions and let them be very valuable. This is awesome. Thank you, Danielle. Accountability for your actions and your choice making have to line up with the will of God, not your own. Yes, you know what? And I might say to that, Danielle, when we tune into our authentic selves, God's will for us is our own. We can align with that will of God, because that is our true self. So actually, I did address that too. Hey, Clarice, love you too. Mwah, so glad you joined. So here's what I believe is that, we will minimize ourselves, and goodness, I think I lost my train of thought, but God's will working in and through us. That's the living word. That's the living life, the Christian life. So it doesn't, the difference between, here's what I was going to say, the difference between being willful or willing. But I believe that, so willful, and I actually dealt with that in my book when I was at a spiritual direction with Dr. Benner. And yes, the willfulness, selfishness, that's not your authentic self. That's not the self. There is the false self, the true self, and all of that. But I really believe that that we need to align with God's will, which is that willing. But we got to trust in a God who loves us, right? We got to trust that God loves us deeply. And if we don't have that piece, then we're going to be struggling with this willingness, willfulness. Okay, first you've got to fix within yourself past hurt, because when you do, you will get other energy that stems from your heart. Absolutely you will. You don't want to walk around hurt perpetually. That just doesn't do anybody any good. It certainly doesn't do you any good. So yes, fix within yourself past hurt. Yeah, let that past hurt Danielle, be something that where is the bigger picture in that past hurt? You know, what we want to do is we want to have what is the narrative around that past hurt. That's what I really would like to communicate, because we're going to have a narrative. Now, if that past hurt was when we were 7, 8, 9 years old, well, when we were 7, 8, 9 years old, our brains weren't even able to handle what our brains are able to handle as adults. So we have framed that past hurt within the framework of the story of an 8, 9, 10 year old child. So that's why it is so good to go to a therapist and make sure that your narrative about all of that, you have the ability to see a bigger picture. You have the ability to see things that you weren't able to. Because here's the thing that I believe about all of us, Danielle, is that we are resilient. We are resilient human beings. And yes, past hurts happen to all of us. That's life, like life. That's life. And so if we go around in our lives and none of us invite hurt into our lives. We don't want to do that consciously ever. But we have that moment of, ooh, that stings. That's not just moment. It could last for years, right? But what we want to do is we want to disempower that hurt from the past. And what the enemy meant for evil, God meant for good. And there's plenty of scriptural stories throughout that show that. Yeah, lots of trauma in the past. What is that now? What is the resilience? What's the resurrection of that? So, yeah, that your heart must be able to see past over that good and bad. Yes, absolutely. So here's what I believe too, Danielle. This is perfect. I think it's so awesome that we're having this conversation, because I don't know if anybody watches. I'm glad that you are. So what direction are we heading? Are we gonna let that past hurt define us, right? No, we're not going to. Did it happen in the past? Yes. Is that who we are? No. We are much bigger than that, because God has a purpose that is much bigger for us. And so here's the thing about the human brain. The human brain can only make sense, we can see our timeline from the past, and then we have these points of transitions and all. So then it makes sense of it. And that's really what the human brain does. But what I'm suggesting here is that we live, yes, in the present moment, but also exercise our God-given imaginations. And also in Proverbs it talks about where there is no vision, the people perish. We've got to have a vision. And the brain does not know the difference between reality or fantasy, right? So having this vision of this life, tuning in with your heart and soul, what are the lessons that we have learned from the past, and how is that a launch pad for your purpose now and in the future? Okay, so Danielle, you said, I have learned that I must take accountability for my actions, and I'm in control of how I feel in my choices that others would. I got to go to more here on this. Would like not to take accountability, but I must pray. And let's see, abilities for my actions. It's up to me, and if I want to be happy or sad, I choose to be. Joy, awesome. You're doing great, Danielle. You're doing great. And that's something else that I've really worked on myself that kind of keeps showing up at different seasons of my life. You can't do for others what only you can do for yourself. Working on yourself is a full-time job. And what other people do or don't do, you can continue to work on yourself. So, and that's a gift. That's a gift, because God